All right, my friends, we are back talking about memoirs and stories that are mission based. This is your book on the page that is pushing a mission forward because it means something to you, right? So, when we talk about a memoir that is able to carry your mission forward, carry your passion forward, there are two types of memoirs that do this very well. And mostly what I have been focusing on in my lessons is the first type, and that's what we call a personal memoir. It's essentially just using the lessons that you've learned in your life, um, or taking the lessons that you've learned and illustrating them, sharing them with the world through your story, through sharing your story. This type of memoir, this type of book reads like a novel. It reads like fiction because you're using storytelling and just helping the world feel what you went through by sharing the experiences and the feelings that kind of tie together. So, the things that happen in your life and how you've interpreted them, how they've changed you, what they taught you, and all of that. So that's what we call a personal memoir. It's something that probably applies to most of the memoirs that you've read. It's the most common form, if you ask me. It's something that we are just so used to seeing and reading that we don't really think about it as a certain type. But it technically is, and it's something that really helps capture a mission in the way that allows you to just kind of pour your heart out. It really helps your readers see how you've experienced life within a particular lens or perspective from your telling. So within this type of memoir, you don't really address your readers. You are telling a story. So you're not like talking to them directly, but what you're doing is just opening yourself up. You're really just being a vulnerable storyteller. You're opening your heart up and you're just sharing truthfully, vulnerably from your perspective, and that allows them to come into the story with you. So you're not talking to them and directly saying like, do you see this? This is why I learned that. But you are just being open and honest in your telling of the truth without holding back things that the readers need to know in order to gain that value. So that's the first type, and I want to bring that type up so that we can compare it to the second type, because I think the second type is really where a lot of mission-based books can get some value from if you are leaning more towards doing something that we will talk about in a minute. Okay, so the second type is there's this phrase that has been coined that I think is it really tells it well. It really describes this type well. Some call it like a transformational teaching memoir, that type of thing. So I like to just call it a teaching memoir, just something that teaches your readers those lessons, but it's more hands-on. Okay, so we talked about the personal memoir, and now we're talking about the teaching memoir, and you might go, well, what is the difference? Let's define this. A teaching memoir or transformational memoir is it uses your story to illustrate the lessons that you've learned that you are going to teach your readers. Okay, so it's kind of like if you took, a self-help book where you're like, this is how you do these things, to, maybe a personal development book where you're like, I'm going to help you transform an aspect of your life. This is how you do that. It's like taking that and a memoir and like combining them. If a memoir and a personal development book had a baby, this would be that. It's still very story based. You're using your story in a particular way to illustrate these lessons, but then you are going a little bit extra and giving your readers more substance, more instruction, more discussion, if you will, about those lessons. So, for example, if you are writing a teaching memoir about what your transformation, your survival through a hard divorce, a difficult divorce, you might just tell the story of what happened in your divorce and illustrate that you learned these particular lessons along the way. And then you might address the readers directly and say, if you're struggling with this, here are some resources, whatever it might be. We'll talk about this in a little bit. There are different ways you can go about delivering value in this type of book. It's not just found in your story, but you're also giving them something extra in order to really give that value about what you learned from your story, from your experience. So it is very story based, but you are empowering the readers with answers and guidance on things that they may need guidance on in this area. It feels a little different than a personal memoir because you can address the readers here. You can tell them your story, and you can use all of the story techniques and all of the almost more fiction-based writing techniques to engage them in your story, but then you're also talking directly to them. You can address them. And so this can be done a couple different ways, and in my next video we're going to specifically dive into this because it's very important to think about before you jump into this, because what you don't want the readers to be is confused because you didn't set them up with the particular context of your book. So we'll talk about that, but just keep in mind there's the personal memoir where your story is the vehicle for the value delivery, and it is narrative based. It is fiction, but true, and it's your life and you're not making this stuff up. And then there is the teaching memoir, which is still very story heavy, and you still want to utilize all of the storytelling techniques, fiction-based techniques like dialogue, character development, that type of thing. You can still certainly use all of that within the narrative pieces of a teaching memoir, especially one that it's generally more valuable to your readers for you to say, like, okay, here's this lesson I have to give you, but can you see how I learned it in my real life? It's sort of like proving your point a little bit. So you want to make sure you bring it in both aspects. Neither one is right or wrong. They're both acceptable. You just have to be mindful about which one you're choosing, and your readers kind of have to be on the same page with you, okay? If you call it a memoir and you structure it like a memoir, you can't slip in little moments of teaching here and there randomly, willy-nilly, without just confusing the readers, right? So we're going to talk more about this in my next video, but think about taking a step back when you think about the mission that you want your book to connect to and move forward in the world. You can consider one of these types of memoirs as supportive of that mission. So which one feels like it might support your book, your story, your mission more? Which one feels more supportive? Which one feels like you are able to give the readers as much as you possibly can? Maybe you do not feel equipped to teach in any objective type of way. Maybe your main teaching method is truly just by telling your story and just saying, hey, this is what I've experienced. Maybe you'll understand because you're going through some stuff. Maybe you'll feel less alone knowing that you aren't the only one that suffered this way or experienced this. Maybe just by sharing with you what I learned in my, trip around the world, it will help you feel motivated, inspired, and move to actually create that same experience for yourself. I don't need to teach you how I did it practically, but just showing you might be what you need to do the thing, right? So neither one is wrong. Neither one is right or wrong. It's just what fits your mission the best, what fits your purpose for writing this book. So that's another angle to look at this mission-based book topic, if you will. And I'm excited to continue the discussion about teaching memoirs in a bit more specific light. So come back for my next video where we'll dive in a little bit more on that. See you there.